79cc Predator engine. It's compact, it's powerful, and fun to modify. Here are some 79 and 99cc engines that we use for mock-up purposes when we're building new parts. You might see a billet flywheel. A lot of people ask us about that, but we don't sell those individually. Here are some parts that we can help you out with. The carburetors, customers send their carburetors to us and we rework those carburetors to increase the performance. We also sell one off the shelf that's ready to go. And then the cylinder heads, send us your cylinder head to get ported and milled. We most commonly mill 50,000s to increase the compression and bump up the power of your little Predator engine. And then the port work, we do various things depending on your application. And then we have our camshafts that we sell as well, reground cams.
Alright, we're going to start with this 79cc Predator carburetor. Start pulling it apart.
So we're going to open up the stock 79cc Predator carb, tear it down to just the bare body of the carburetor. We're not going to show exactly what we do inside the carb. That is somewhat our specialty. We spend a lot of hours of R&D and putting these things on the flow bench and making mistakes, making progress, and reaching the point that we're at now with these carburetors.
We notice that some of these carburetors are starting to come without the main jet here. They just have the body of the carburetor drilled through to the jet size without an actual jet in it. So for those, we are drilling through that and tapping it and putting an actual main jet in it.
We make it thinner so that we have a bigger air fuel charge that can pass through the carburetor and into the engine.
Alright, we drill the main jets out and we drill them with the number 67 drill bit. It's 32 thousandths.
So we'll use the number 80 main jet for a mild 79cc Predator that just has a high flow air filter, free flowing exhaust and some of the basics. And when you get a little more in depth with the Predator engine, boring out the carb and doing some head work and putting our cam in there, we jump up to a number 82 main jet. And that's what we find that works for us here at sea level. So with the carburetor complete and a side-by-side comparison, it's really hard to tell the difference. Our carb that we bored and reworked is on the left, and it looks very similar to a stock carb. With the cylinder heads that customers send us, the first thing we do is we tear them down to a bare head. With the carb stud sticking out like that, we can't get our porting tools in there, and as you can see, some of the tools that we use are long and we can't get the reach that we need, so we'll take those carburetor studs out of there. And there's a couple different ways to do it. You can grab some channel locks and just take them out with some channel locks, but it kind of mars the stud, chews it up a little bit if you're not careful. And so a better way is to take the two nuts that came off of there and thread them onto one stud up against each other, tighten them up against each other. And once you have those on there nice and tight up against each other, you can put your wrench on the inside nut, and then you could back the stud out of the cylinder head. And it's a pretty convenient way to get the carburetor studs out of the cylinder head without messing them up. And then you just take the nuts off of the one stud, switch them over to the other, and repeat the same process to get the second carburetor stud out of the cylinder head. And then with the exhaust studs, we usually leave those in there. We can work around those and it doesn't present a problem. And then taking the valves out with the retainers and the springs. The retainer has a little slot in there, so you just want to press it down and slide it over to the bigger opening on the slot to lift it up and off of the valve. And then the valve just drops out of the bottom of the cylinder head. Pretty easy to do with stock springs. You can compress them pretty easily with your thumbs. And this is a valve seal that you will commonly find only on the intake side. That's how it comes from the factory, so don't be alarmed if you don't see one on the exhaust side. Next are the rocker studs. You'll need a deep set 12mm socket, and we usually prop the head up on the edge of our bench there and press it down with one hand and then break those loose with our ratchet in our other hand, and then they're pretty easy to thread out by hand. And with those coming out, the pushrod guide plate comes out as well. So the first step typically is that we mill down the valve guide that protrudes up into the bowl area, and so that's what we're doing here. We're going to mill it down flush to the bottom of the bowl so it's not sticking up out into the bowl. On these 79cc cylinder heads, there isn't a whole lot of valve guide that is protruding up into the bowl area, so we're just taking down a little bit of it, and then when we do the actual porting inside the port, we do a little more work on top of that guide as well. And so you can see on the left, the valve guide is down flush with the bowl, and on the right, it's sticking up, and we'll do that one next. So now both of the valve guides are milled down flush with the bowl. And the first thing we're going to do is work on this bump that is sticking up. There's a bump in the casting right there that wraps around the valve guide. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take that bump down. We have to be careful with this tool. It's a really aggressive, and if you're not careful, it'll really bite into the aluminum and make a big gouge, make a hole in there. We ruined plenty of cylinder heads practicing with this tool. So we focused on that bump that we showed you, and then next, when we move to the next tool, we're going to focus on this transition area, this port to bowl transition. It's sharp from the factory, and so we smooth that out so it's a cleaner transition from the port to the bowl. Now here's a look once that bump has been cleaned out of there, and there's a smoother transition without that bump in there. This is the next tool we go to. This one isn't quite as aggressive. However, you still have to keep it moving when you're doing your work inside the cylinder head. If you let this sit still, it'll also tear into the aluminum. We'll go over that bump area that we worked on earlier and smooth that out a little bit more, and then we focus a lot on that transition from the port to the bowl and get that sharp edge off of there and clean that up. We're not trying to remove a lot of material as far as the diameter of the port. It's really just cleanup work that we're doing to make the transitions nice and smooth and take out the sharp edges. Now here we have the sandpaper roll, and this is what we use for the finish work, and also for the short side radius that we're working on right there. The short side radius has a really sharp edge from the factory, and so we use a sandpaper roll to smooth that out and kind of round it out. We use a finger test to make sure it's nice and smooth, and then we go back in there and work on any areas that need a little more attention. Now you can see we've made a lot of progress. The ports are much cleaner. Now we go back in with the sandpaper roll and kind of finish up. Smooth things out the best that we can. Get everything nice and clean and smooth to the touch with our finger. And we're also really careful not to damage the valve seats here. It's easy to mar them or scuff them up. So we're really careful about that. Regardless, we do go back and clean up and inspect the seats, but we do our best not to do any damage to them. Alright, now we're going to set up the cylinder head to cut the seats. Sometimes they get scuffed, marred, or slightly damaged during the porting process. So we have a New Way seat cutter kit that we use. And we have 3 cutters that we use on these cylinder heads. The 3 cutters have different angles on them. We have a 60, 45, and 30 degree angle. So it's a 3-angle valve job that we put on the cylinder heads. And this will ensure that we get a good valve seal. You know, there's no point in doing all this work, porting and milling, and then having seats that don't create a good seal. So we do our best to put these angles on those seats and make sure that they're creating a good seal with the valves. Now we're going to lap the valves. So we have 2 lapping compounds that we use. We have a heavy and a fine, and so we'll start with the heavy compound and we'll lap the valves in there, and this will do a couple things for us. This will show us the contact patch. So we want the valve to contact the seat on the 45 degree angle, not on the 60 degree angle that we created, not on the 30 degree angle, but on the 45. So with the lapping that we do here, we can visually inspect the seat and see where the valve is making contact. And same thing on the valve. The contact point on the valve is important to us. We want it on toward the edge of the valve. However, we don't want it falling off the edge of the valve, but near the edge of the valve. Now, if we're not happy with the contact point between the valve and the seat, we can cut the seat again. We can manipulate the location of the contact point by which cutter we use and how much we use it on the seat, and we can change that position where the valve and the seat contact each other. So there's a little bit of back and forth in checking your work, but it's important to get it where you want it. So once we're finished lapping the valves in the cylinder head and we're happy with the results, we'll set it up on the mill and we'll take care of the milling. And the most common amount that we mill off the cylinder head is 50 thousandths, and for the 79cc engine we still have plenty of valve to piston clearance, and milling 50 thousandths will increase the compression enough to make a noticeable difference. And you can still run pump gas, but it gives you that bump in compression that makes a noticeable difference in the power output. Once the milling is complete, we can remove the cylinder head from the mill, and it's time to clean it up. So we'll scrub it down with some soap and water. We have our toothbrush that we can fit inside the ports and really scrub this thing. We want to make sure we definitely get all that lapping compound out of there. We don't want to leave any of that behind, so just give it a good scrub down. We clean these things up so they're ready to be reassembled. The reassembly process goes pretty smooth. We just do the reverse of what we did when we disassembled the head. One little trick is balling up our rag and sort of shoving it into the combustion chamber, and that'll help hold the valves up when we put the springs and the retainers on. On the 200cc engines, the rocker arm pivot studs get torqued to 17 foot-pounds, and so we do the same with the 79cc engine. The pivot studs are generally the same size, or roughly the same size, so 17 foot-pounds for those. And then we put the carb studs back on for the customer so that when they receive it, it's ready to bolt right on. So I hope this video gives you a good idea of what we can do here at AGK to help you with your 79cc Predator build. For those who are interested in this service, we'll show you where you can go on the Affordable Go-Karts website and some options that we have as far as machine work. If you go to engines, scroll down to machine shop, you can see here we have a few different options for the machine work we do as far as working on the carbs and the cylinder heads and doing the porting, the milling, and the valve jobs. And then also for 79cc customers, you can go to the 79cc performance parts, and if you go to the second page and then scroll down to the cylinder head, you can add this cylinder head to your cart along with other items you're interested in for your 79cc engines. And then here we have some of the options as far as whether you want us to mill it and how much you want us to mill off. The 50 thousandths is the most common, is what we usually suggest, is 50 thousandths. And then just add that to your cart along with your other parts. Send us your cylinder head. Harbor Freight no longer sells us cylinder heads, so you send us your cylinder head and we'll do the work and we'll ship it back out to you along with whatever other parts you had in your cart. Pretty straightforward process if you're interested in having your cylinder head ported and milled. Here's a little bonus footage for you. This is the most interesting small vehicle we've ever owned. This is a baby Bugatti. The baby Bugatti is it's an electric car for kids that was designed after the original Bugattis, the Type 35 racing Bugattis of the 20s. These are really neat little vehicles. They're electric, like I said, and you can see original Bugatti gauges in there. Really cool little thing. We sold it and We're crating it up and it's off to Indiana.